Welcome back to the Armchair Attorney Podcast. I am your host, Matthew Leffler, a real-life lawyer and law professor, and I love the supply chain. It's been a minute, hasn't it? We had our good friend Bill Driegert from DAT Dial-A-Truck on the show last week, and now we continue our momentum, bringing our good friend of the show, and one of our trusted advertising partners, Brian Joyce of GenLogs. Ooh, we do love GenLogs, don't we? I think you're in store for a wonderful program. But before we get to all of that, let's do a quick little recap, shall we? The Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS as the kids call it, had a very impactful decision, though we're not quite sure what the impact is just yet, around broker liability. When can a broker be held liable for negligently selecting an unsafe motor carrier? And that begs the question, what is a negligent selection process? Spoiler, we don't know. And what is an unsafe motor carrier? Also, not quite sure we know that answer either, but perhaps with a little bit of truck intelligence, we can figure that out. Last week, I was down in Chattanooga for a minute with my good buddy Craig Fuller talking about transportation and logistics with none other than Administrator Derek Bars on the Freight Expectations podcast. You should check that out too. I'll maybe put a link here in the show notes. But the reality is we are in uncharted waters. Yes, we did have a couple of federal circuit courts that did say brokers could potentially be held liable for negligent selection, specifically the 6th Circuit and the 9th Circuit. But now it's every circuit. It's all of them, not just the 9th and the 6th. And the only way you know the answer to what is a negligent selection and what is an unsafe carrier is litigation. That's right. We're going to have lawsuits, and the lawsuits will develop tests, and those tests will be applied to the facts, and the facts will reveal exactly what is the right selection process or a reasonable selection process and what is an unsafe motor carrier. But the reality is we are in a different time than we have ever been before. The American people actually care about what we do in the supply chain. That is interesting. They cared during COVID because they couldn't get their couch or their lawn furniture because they were stuck in a boat off the port of Long Beach or LA. But now we're asking really tough questions. I want to get home in the same condition that I left. That's what we all want to have, isn't it? I think so. And having just spent the last 8 hours on a car trip with my 4 children, wife, and dog, and we did in fact survive, it is something we all really want to get dialed into. An international road check is behind us. We'll find the data on that relatively soon. We'll do another episode about that in the days and weeks to come. But here is today's story. We are here because of you. You find what we do in this podcast interesting, entertaining, educational. I don't know. You seem to continue to want to listen to me, and I appreciate that. What I try to do is demystify what is happening in the supply chain as best I can from a legal perspective, but I've been in this industry for 16 years. My father was a roadway guy back in the 70s. My grandpa was an owner-operator back in the 50s and 60s. So I kind of love this business. I don't think I can get out. And my next guest, who we've had on the show several times, Ryan Joyce, is kind of new to supply chain. Fortunately, I think he now realizes he can't escape. None of you can escape, but most of you think you can, and I respect you for doing that. But we're asking a tough question today. What is an unsafe motor carrier? And that question is one that's going to be on the top of mind for every motor carrier, every broker, every shipper, every regulator, because we need answers. And there are hundreds of thousands of motor carriers that are out there every single day moving your freight. And the national out of service rate for commercial vehicles is 22%. That means on the road right now, 22% of those vehicles, if you stop them and you looked at them, you would see that they are unsafe. Brakes, lights, tires, BLTs, delicious for lunch, not necessarily delicious for your vehicle maintenance. But we're talking about truck intelligence. And that is why I am so pumped to welcome my very good friend, Ryan Joyce, to the program. Ryan, How are you?
Well, it is good to be back. And I wish I sounded a little bit better. I am, while you were spending vacation last week with the family, up until last night, I was on a ventilator, catheter, and I ripped it all out just to come on the show because I would not miss this at all. No, I just have a little cold. But as long as the audience can bear with it, I promise two things. Today will be highly entertaining and highly educational at the same time.
Well, that is what I hope for. And if it's any consolation, and I don't know that it is, I feel great. I feel terrific. I'm well rested. I'm relaxed. I don't have a cold yet, but it's tis the season. But thank you for joining. So, a couple of things have happened in the industry since we last spoke. I'd love to get your perspective.
Yeah, a couple of things for sure. Wouldn't it have been great if that Supreme Court decision came with a manual next to it that just had the really clear definition of what safe meant and what unsafe meant, and everyone could have just followed it, and we really wouldn't have any reason to talk today. But alas, big question marks came behind the decision. A lot of freight brokers that I've been chatting with over the last week have been in a mix between we are doing nothing different to we are trying to figure out how much we need to do different. And I don't really think that anyone has an aligned on a way forward.
I couldn't agree with you more. I've had some very similar conversations. The big takeaway, at least at the initial phase, is brokers now have to really think hard about carrying some sort of liability insurance. There's no legal mandate today for a broker to have contingent auto or whatever kind of liability we're talking about. But now it seems to be that you probably need to have that.
Probably a good idea. Just like we as a tech company have insurance, especially on the liability side, as we touch customer data and otherwise, it's just probably good practice to have it. And of course, and unfortunately, this ruling probably just means that liability insurance is going to get a little bit more expensive for everyone too.
100%. I think shippers are starting to wake up and go, wait, is there any potential liability for me? I thought I insulated myself. That is continuing to be tested all across this country. But one of the things that I've always been so enamored with you and Genlogs was that you came to this industry from a different perspective. Your background is intelligence gathering, not for trucks and trailers and shippers to say, hey, did my trailer full of Wheaties arrive on time? You were doing different types of intelligence gathering. Can we just, for a moment, circle back to your background and what brought you to this incredibly chaotic and wonderful industry that moves America?
Yeah, for sure. Genlogs, we call it the truck intelligence platform. As you alluded to before, unlike you, I do not have that trucking background, didn't grow up in a family surrounded by it. But I did come from the intelligence side. So I spent a number of years at CIA where I was conducting counterterrorism operations, really looking for signals or intelligence that would also signal a certain amount of risk, but that risk had maybe even higher stakes, which would be another September 11th or some ungodly attack that could happen on US soil or to US persons abroad. So we were constantly gathering every single shred of data and looking for, was there a signal of risk that we could therefore get ahead of to shut down the plans and intentions of Al Qaeda or ISIS before another attack happened?
It's about gathering as many forms of intelligence, integrating them, and then making decisions based on all the stuff that's gathered. I think, a very practical sense, there is no single source of truth. There is a combination of various technologies or various forms of intelligence gathering that then says, okay, this is what is happening. This is what we need to do. So I imagine you come to supply chain, you're like, oh, well, I bet they already have all of this. And then I suspect you're surprised and go, oh, wait, this is like the game Mousetrap. And there's a bunch of things that happen one after the other. And there's really no way off of this crazy merry-go-round.
I was just truly shocked when I started to investigate this industry. And I found that there was basically only three sources of data out there. Number one was self-reported data. Hey, I'm safe. I'm good to go.
The best data. I feel very good.
Yeah, sounds good. That's number one. Number two was, well, here, get access to my electronic logs from my trucks, the trackers that are there. I knew from the intelligence day, all of that could be manipulated and spoofed. And sure enough, when I started chatting with people about what are some of the most egregious thefts they had or the most egregious accidents that they were involved with, it seemed to always be that there was a manipulation of some of that data beforehand. And then, of course, third and finally is the government inspection data, FMCSA data that is caught sporadically by motor carriers when they're out there on the roads and they get pulled in for an inspection. The fact that they were at a time and place, maybe had some problems, that would be captured. But those were really the only three vectors of data: self-reported, ELD connections, and then the government data. And I was like, man, all of this, I could spoof all of this. How do we get ahead of this to make a true ground truth data set that you could not manipulate? And that's really what bore Genlogs.
And you have kind of, as you've dove into this problem, like what I get so excited about is I was kind of watching from the sidelines as you began to fight and claw your way into this industry. And the idea of going around the country on the most populated highways all across the nation and installing the kind of technologies that you do to watch and monitor commercial vehicles. It had really never been done. People had thought about doing things like that, but it hadn't been done at a big enough scale to provide valuable insights. And so now you're at a stage, and this is why I love talking to you, because you've done the Series A, you've done the Series B, you've raised tens of millions of dollars, and you're deploying that cash to fight this problem. Initially, I think, was targeting the scourge of cargo theft and fraud. But then you quickly kind of find out, well, when you're looking at motor carriers, you get to kind of dive in a little bit more into the truck itself, the trailer itself, who hauls it, how long they've been driving. There's all of these things you start to learn. And I fundamentally believe, and I think most people agree, you can't manage anything unless you measure it. And the measurement tools weren't there until you arrived. And now there's this new set of tools to measure, and that allows you presumably to manage more of your capacity. So this is just a real quick answer. Yeah, yes or no. Like, what's an unsafe carrier?
Yeah, just a real quick answer. Well, Matt, I wanted to make sure that we, like I said, had an educating and very entertaining conversation here today. So I actually put together a few slides for the listening audience. I'm going to talk through them. But I think it's really interesting. This is probably something that the Supreme Court didn't take into account when they were going with this ruling. So let me just go ahead and share my screen for walking through what is an unsafe carrier. So here we go. So I'm going to break this down. We're going to really focus on the full truckload for hire carriers. I mean, there's about 750,000 truck carriers that are out there on the roads. What Genlogs really helps in terms of connecting to freight brokerages are really the active and authorized full truckload for hire carriers out there. There's a lot of various definitions, but when you conduct a search in Genlogs these days, we will show you one of 353,766. We're going to use this as our overarching population as we start to whittle down to try to find out what is safe with the various types of measurements that are out there. So,
well, wouldn't it be fair to say that if there's 353,000 that are admitted to move freight within the United States through the FMCSA, every one of them would be safe?
Oh, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't that be nice?
Well, let's start to break this down a little bit more. First, I think it's worth talking about the magnitude of how much of those carriers does Genlogs see on a regular basis. And the answer is about 95% of that. So at last count, within the last month or two, we've seen 334,535 of those carriers. So 95% is really the population that I would be focusing on. The reason being is a lot of those that we aren't seeing went out of business a while ago. And that is a huge risk that their motor carrier number could be sold to a fraudster or a thief to steal your freight. And so I often use this as kind of like the actual population that I would want to focus on.
I think that also kind of dovetails with what we've learned from Administrator Bars and the team at the FMCSA is that there are what we call them dormant or shut down motor carriers that just aren't there. And I think part of their push recently with the new Modus platform is to try to winnow that number down further. But so you're telling me from the 353,000, active and authorized, you're seeing any given month about 95% of those motor carriers.
That's correct. So we'd have data on 95% of those, where they are, the types of equipment that they operate with. That's what we are observing. It's more than any other platform out there, just because we see everything on the roads. Now, I'm going to go ahead and kind of give you the first gate of what people try to use when they talk about, hey, is this a safe carrier? And what they'll often try to use is those out of service scores that you referenced earlier on. Now, as you said, there's 22% of the trucks on the roads are out of service, meaning when the vehicle themselves get inspected, something, whether it's the BLT, brakes, lights, and trailers, or all of these other issues, there might be something, and then all of a sudden they are put out of service. Well, when you combine both the vehicle and the driver's out of service scores, we come down to about 226,000 carriers that actually are below the national average on both sides.
And that might also be like a portion of the vehicles that are safe and the portion that are unsafe. So a motor carrier could have a couple units that are out of service, but others that are okay. But generally, as we're looking at this whole population further reduced. Now we're talking 226,000 vehicles and drivers are generally meeting the minimum criteria of the federal regulations on safety and maintenance and hours of service.
Yeah, another way to say this is about a third of all of the carriers that are out there either are above the out of service, the national average for vehicle or driver out of service. So right away, a plaintiff's attorney is going to go after you if you are using one of those carriers that half the time their drivers are unfit to be driving the trucks out there.
This might be those conditional safety rating motor carriers that have been stuck in a position where they just simply can't get to a satisfactory.
That would be a great way to put it. And so this is like the first gate, we'll kind of say, is only 2/3 of the available carriers on the roads are even under the national average when it comes to out of service. And then we go to the next kind of gate here. This is where basic scores, I'll get into what those are in a minute, but of those, all of the carriers on the roads, only about 41% of them have both their out of service scores are below the national average and their basic scores are all below the cohort medians.
Okay.
Now, what are basic scores? Well, they're behavioral analysis and safety improvement categories. This is how the FMCSA, through their safety measurement system, scores carriers. And it deserves to be said that all they will publicly talk about is unsafe driving or public scores, unsafe driving, hours of service compliance, vehicle maintenance, controlled substances and alcohol, or driver's fitness, those 5 categories. And even then, they only assign an integer, like a 1 or a 2, but you don't know what a 1 for one carrier means compares to a 2 for another, unless you calculate it as a percentage, which is what FMCSA only shows carriers, by the way, and not brokers or the public.
It's also worth noting that the FMCSA will say on that same website and database, like, do not use this as reliance for determining whether a motor carrier is safe or not safe. Like, this is this is partially why this broker liability case has been so interesting, is that we don't have clear guidelines for a lot of these things. And now brokers in this really unique position of saying, okay, what am I supposed to do? So now we've gone from 353,000 in this general pond or lake or ocean of motor carriers, and we're down to 144,000. So we've gotten a third or so of these, 2/3 or so kind of off the table. Then clearly these 144,000 have got to be safe, right?
Oh, have they? Well, let's take a look at the next gate then, which is these basic scores are used by the FMCSA to compute what's known as an ISS score, an inspection selection score. Now, that is this is a graphic actually taken from an FMCSA document here, where they bucket the inspection selection scores into 3 categories. So at the very top, you have a inspect or an immediate inspection category. Basically, any carrier between a 75 to 100. So that's on the higher end. These ISS scores go 1 to 100. If you are in that 75 to 100, one of the definitions that the FMCSA delivers is that those are considered high risk carriers. It could be they're out of service carriers or otherwise. That would push a carrier into this bucket. What does that mean in practice? It means that as a carrier is going down past an inspection site, one of those weigh stations on a highway, this would be what those inspection officers would use to kind of triage these carriers as they come past. If they're in the second bucket, that optional, which is 50 to 74, then it's really up to the discretion of that weigh station or inspector at the time. Do they get pulled in or not? But again, one of the definitions from FMCSA is carriers with unsafe and crash indicator basics prioritized for intervention. Now, if they have a category called unsafe, and they're basically saying these carriers are in this unsafe category that will decide whether we want to inspect them based on how busy we are, then that would also be a band of these ISS scores that could be problematic. So the last one, the pass, so to say, it's any carrier with an ISS score between 1 to 49. And that is only contingent upon there being enough data to begin with for them to receive an ISS score. We'll actually talk a little bit later about what happens when there isn't enough data, but we're going to use this kind of triaging here to say for inspection or optional, given that they are either considered high-risk carriers or they could be carriers with unsafe or crash indicators, maybe based on the Supreme Court ruling, we don't want to use them, which means we're going to now narrow this bucket of, or the available pool of carriers down even more to saying, okay, what about they have to hit all of the gates above, but also have ISS scores below 50%, meaning they're a pass. So they have good OSS scores, good basic scores, good ISS scores. That's 109,000 carriers now. About 31% of all carriers on the roads are even matching this definition.
Okay, so if we're talking like if they're based on inspected mandatory, we're going to say they're not part of it. The ISS, how does someone find it? Is that just on the website, or how does a broker know where to go to even find that database?
Yeah, and this is another one of those issues. There is no public way to look up an ISS score because the FMCSA only reveals the scores to the carrier them itself. Like each carrier can see its own. No one can see it all on the others, but there's a little asterisk here. The FMCSA has produced a white paper which talks about how the basic percentiles and the ISS scores are calculated, which means if you have access to the data of all carriers on the roads and all the inspections of those carriers on the roads, you can actually reverse engineer what the basics and ISS scores are for any given carrier. And this is exactly what GenLogs has done.
Interesting. So you have reverse engineered how that ISS score is created. Are carriers able to, like, on their own say, hey, here's my score, you should look at it, to a broker or something? Is that something that is feasible, or is that not something they can do?
Well, they could certainly screenshot, they could fill in a form, they could do that, but it's going to go back to that whole self-reporting issue. If I'm a carrier that is unscrupulous and I have a 99 ISS score, well, my incentive is to report that as a 49.
I thought my ISS was perfect, and I think you should take my word for it. So, all right. So you've reverse engineered. So you've gone from 353,000 active authorized full truckload for hire motor carriers. We're down to 109,000. And within your platform, within GenLogs, you can see your reverse engineered version of the ISS number.
That's right. And so you might say, we've arrived. This is that cohort that we want to be working with. Well,
finally, we're done. Like we're only 20 minutes in. We can wrap it up early. Everyone can have 15. Wait, is there, unless there's more?
There's a little bit more, because you don't want to use one of these carriers that maybe got in an accident in the last year that all of a sudden you're looking at, oh my gosh, what if that accident record caused me to kind of be hauled before an attorney or a court when the next accident happens? And so we can narrow it down even further by saying all the above must be true, and they must have had no crashes in the past year. And then now we're down to around 94,000, or 27%, roughly 1 in 4 of the initial population. That's where we kind of get to now, of like the safest carriers, you might say.
It's interesting on crash data, and I've talked a lot with different friends in the business about this. So crash data with FMCSA is about a truck was involved in the crash. So doesn't at all indicate liability. And generally speaking, the majority of crashes are caused by those four-wheelers, those men and women on their cell phones as they don't see the truck or trailer stopping. But it is indicative of some issues maybe that people want to pay attention to. So you're able to winnow away no crashes in the past year with an ISS below 50%. So now we have, this is a pretty defensible position, I would think. Also, quick disclaimer, don't take legal advice from a podcast. If you think you need a lawyer, you probably do. And it's not me unless you've hired me, then I'm happy to represent you. But this shows us we've figured it out. We have gone from 353 now to 94. Clearly, we have a good solid base of safe motor carriers.
Except there's one more bucket, Matthew.
What?
This is probably the one that people talk about the most these days, is the fact that the FMCSA itself provides a safety rating to carriers. The problem is that only about 6% of all carriers on the road actually have a satisfactory safety rating. Most of them are in the bucketed of unrated or conditional. So if we want that rubber stamp of approval from the government saying, we've looked at them, we've investigated them, we've audited them, and they are satisfactory, then that bucket actually drops down to only 8,000 carriers from that initial. Only 2% of carriers actually satisfy all of those above requirements.
Okay, hold on. I think you've done something here, Ryan, that I don't think you intended to, but I want to just kind of pull this thread. Are you telling me we have a driver shortage? Do we have a motor carrier shortage? If this is what we've come down to, and this is, I think, is really, really important for our viewers and our listeners, is that the satisfactory for safety rating is very rare in our business. And I think the vast majority of people in this country, and I would include even our legislature and our judiciary and our executive branch, do not understand that the vast majority have no rating, or they have maybe there's a portion that have conditional. But if you go down from 353,766 active and authorized full truckload for hire motor carriers, and you cut out the ones that have not been observed because they're not actively running. You remove people that are above the national average for out of service and driver behavior. You look at basic scores. You look at ISS scores that you've kind of reverse engineered. And then you get down to where they also happen to have a satisfactory safety rating. You go from 353,000 to 7,971. This is the impossible situation that freight brokers are put into. Now, I'm not saying Montgomery was decided wrong. This is what the Supreme Court unanimously decided. But what brokers now face is this impossible task of doing the work the government does, which is to determine who is safe and who is unsafe, or what is a reasonable process to select a motor carrier, while also avoiding controlling the motor carrier too much. Like, a broker is not going to say, give me your driver qualification files to every single driver that the motor carrier has. But what I want to kind of just, and I let you want to continue, but this is the stark reminder of where we are in this industry. Many people are operating blind as to who their counterparty is, because there is no way to know. And I have said this multiple times everywhere that I go. If our government cannot tell us who is safely meeting the standards set by the government itself, that agency needs more resources. There's no doubt in my mind that Administrator Bars and Deputy Administrator Nielsen and the entire phenomenal team of the FMCSA care deeply about the safety of America's highways, but they are simply hamstrung because there are 353,000 motor carriers and there are 7,971 that have a satisfactory safety rating. There's something wrong. But now, clearly, we have established we have our safe driver population.
Well, you certainly, by definition, would say that in that little green square, and for those that are listening only, you essentially have concentric squares or circles that all narrow down to this just 2% of the starting population. And Matthew, you and I both know that if this is truly the standard, then shopping shelves everywhere are going to look like this over the coming months. It just is untenable. It can't happen. that can't be where we're drawing the line. So what do we do about it? And really the way that I've started to talk with our customers and brokerages about it is you can certainly use this rubric to help guide an understanding of where the risk is. But instead of kind of using this concentric circle, let's turn it into a target in which the gold standard certainly would be in that middle. You'd love to work with your entire customer or carrier base is all of those that are match every single OSS and or OOS and ISS and basics and satisfactory. They're all there, but that's just not the case. And as you radiate out from the middle, you're going to have carriers that fall into all of those different categories. And that's what I call this concept of risk radials. You go out from the middle and you're taking on a little bit more risk, but can you document why that carrier is worthy of being used, that they've put into place a reasonable policy to have a standard carrier, that you're asking them the hard questions that is going to be defensible were there to be an issue in the future.
This is madness. Okay, so what are brokers supposed to do? I mean, we already have all the vetting platforms. We get access to the certificates of insurance. We have the government database. Walk me through, Ryan. Like, what do we do next? What do we do from here?
Well, before we get into that, I just like to debunk one little myth that I think immediately came out after this ruling, and that was that the large carriers are going to be the winners. That for some reason
they are, and so are the large brokers.
Well, just for some reason, just because they had more trucks on the road suddenly meant that like they were just going to get all of the freight. And I just like to quickly debunk that by saying there are absolutely some larger carriers out there that have really rigorous driver selection, safety, fleet maintenance, all of this. I think Walmart is actually a pretty good example of this.
One of the most admired carriers. Absolutely.
Yeah, they pay their drivers quite well. And you actually can look at their scores. This is taken directly out of GenLogs. And we see that they have a rather low ISS score. Again, it's under the 50 percentile. Their basic scores are all extremely low across the board. They have a lower driver out of service rating than the national average. It's only 0.18%, where the national average is almost 7%. And then similarly with their vehicle out of service, only 3.15%. Where the national average is, almost 8 times that much. And so you'd say, like, of course, if Walmart were a for-hire carrier out there, they might be getting all the freight. But you look at some of the others, and this is not to pick on anyone because it's really hard to operate a fleet out there. But like Covenant Logistics is a very well-known fleet in the market. And yet we look at like publicly, you could see what their out of service score is. It is above the national average. And I don't know how to like get around that other than saying when they get inspected, their vehicles are put out of service at a higher rate than the entire national average is. We also see, and this could be partially related, that they have basic scores that are elevated for unsafe driving and for crash data. And that is leading to an estimated ISS score that is in that immediate inspection category.
And it becomes that circle of death. If you're in the moment where you have to be inspected every single time, inspectors will find things that are defective with your equipment. And it's like this thing where you can't outrun your reputation. And I can imagine, crash data, I put that kind of to the side, but when I look at vehicle maintenance, that is something you can control. Like you have your drivers do pre and post trips. You have your mechanics fix the things that are broken or go to a provider that doesn't, that can do those repairs for you. So it is one thing I will mention. I think this is part of my general talking point on big carriers being able to be maybe winners in this circumstance. Not that they're safer necessarily than the smaller motor carriers. It's that they have tons of insurance. And as a plaintiff attorney, you're not necessarily looking, you want to get as much money as you can, but if your motor carrier has $100 million policy, you're probably going to be made whole. It's the small motor carriers that don't have the insurance. That's when they typically go for the brokers. But your point is very well taken that there are big motor carriers that have problems. And if we are okay with the safety ratings we see, we all have a problem because it's not very good.
Well, and I'm going to debunk it a little bit more. And hopefully I'm not like too negative Nancy here, but even comparing these two carriers becomes difficult when you look at their unsafe driving records and look at the inspections that happened over this last month there, both Walmart and Covenant had the exact same level 10 severity citation for speeding in a work or construction zone. And so, were there to be an accident in the future, God forbid, that hit a roadside worker out there, a plaintiff's attorney will certainly, whether it's Covenant, Walmart, or anyone else, look at that record and say, well, why did you hire them when they had already had a level 10 severity for speeding in these work zones? Of course, there was going to be another accident. And so, what I'm getting at here is that even these scores don't tell the whole story, where underneath those scores, the inspections or the violations can also show similar behavior among two carriers, even if one has a higher basic or ISS score and the other doesn't.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with the size of the fleet. So the bigger your pool of assets, when you get dinged for something, its impact on your overall numbers aren't as significant. Because they're looking at Walmart with 13,000 some odd power units versus Covenant with 800. That ding for 800 power unit fleet is far more substantial than a big guy like Walmart. But it's any given day, and that's the challenge I think for brokers facing is that we're looking at your hiring process, your selection process. We can't make you a guarantor of the performance of the motor carrier, but as a plaintiff attorney, you don't know anything about how they selected it or what happened that day. So you're going to sue everybody, and they're going to have to prove with evidence that they had a reasonable process. So clearly, every broker should tender freight only to Walmart. That would solve all of these problems. But to your point, Walmart hasn't made those trucks and trailers available because they want to move their own private stuff, which I guess makes them money. But there might be another business opportunity for Walmart in the future if they keep up these numbers.
Well, let's just talk about one more element here, Matthew, and that's what do you do when there's insufficient data? And I'll give you a great example of a carrier that I actually know personally and know him quite well. His name's Brian Woodring, and he's an owner-operator driving Anchor Reliable Transport. That's the name of his carrier. Look at where he's been. I'm showing a screen here. Basically, over the last year, he operates mostly east of Mississippi, a little bit into Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. But he's based out of the Indiana area and drives all over the place. And yet, he has only been inspected twice over the last year, only twice, despite all of these miles.
More than most. That's true, though.
And I would credit that to the fact that he was a team driver for almost 2 decades. One of those multi-million-dollar, zero issues, zero accidents before he set off to run his own carrier. He's one of the safest carriers you're going to find out there. And as a result, he just never has issues with lights or brakes or this and that might pull him in for an inspection. So today he has a 0 driver out of service rating, a 0 vehicle out of service rating, despite putting thousands of miles on his truck out there on the roads. And because he only has 2 inspections, that means that by definition, he doesn't have basic scores or ISS scores yet. It requires a minimum amount of inspections or data over a 2-year period to even get a score. And so Brian's falling in this category, which is rather large when you look at all of the carriers that are on the roads. In fact, Genlogs has seen over 30,000 carriers on the roads that has just never had an inspection. And we see them out there quite a bit. And the reason I'm flagging this insufficient data piece is because it gets even more difficult, because you can't tell with data alone whether Brian, or in this case, Anchor Reliable Transport, is a good carrier that just never gets inspected, or if they are a chameleon carrier that's reconstituted, that is known to be unsafe if you actually knew who owned it, who operated the trucks in it, and they just haven't had the inspections yet to actually figure that out.
But Ryan, we had a 60 Minutes piece. Like, clearly we know about chameleon carriers, so obviously it's been solved. So I don't know why we have to go back to that. What are you getting at with this chameleon carrier thing?
Well, what I'm getting at is when they spin down a carrier that their safety scores have gotten too out of whack, too high risk, and they spin that down, and then they reconstitute as another carrier. You as the freight broker don't know when you're about to work with them whether they are a chameleon carrier or not. It could be a new entrant. It could be you think maybe you're dealing with a 10-year carrier that's had their authority for 10 years. Maybe it was sold to one of these chameleon carriers. I want to walk you through why this is so dangerous. This was a carrier that we were tracking, a chameleon carrier earlier this year, who the first time we had ever really saw it operating on the road was on 16th of December of last year. All of a sudden that we saw a few times that operating on the road, and we're like, okay, it's out there, still hadn't been inspected yet. Well, it wasn't more than a day or two later after that, we have our own kind of review score that Genlogs uses that is able to detect chameleon carrier activity on the roads. Now, I can't get all into the proprietary elements of it, but it's a combination of cameras and other types of data that we triangulate. And we say, is this a chameleon carrier or not? And in this case, that flipped in the end of December and said, hey, Genlogs actually thinks this is a chameleon carrier. At the time, every other platform was just like single truck, single trailer carrier, low risk, no issues. And then we watched what happened after that. And we saw the first crash happen in the data, kind of looking back after that. We saw 4 more crashes happened before this carrier tried to change their insurance provider before those crashes were actually fully claimed.
One bad day for one bad driver.
You would think so. They immediately have another crash. And in fact, they go on to have 10 crashes in about 10 weeks on what was still then claimed as a single truck, single trailer carrier out there.
Great for the repair companies that can get the truck fixed and back on the road so rapidly. That's the story we're talking about, right?
Well, speaking of the 60 Minutes episode, it's probably no surprise that when we looked at, well, what trailer were they always carrying when they were out there on the roads? Indeed, we always saw this specific carrier paired with Super Ego, but with dozens of trucks. And the reason this is so important is because we see this leading indicator out there. And we fast forward to a carrier that is still out there on the roads, or at least was over the last month. They just started to wipe their activity clean out there, and they're about to jump to another MC, no doubt. It's their 7 Logistics LLC. We saw them out on the roads in kind of the early to mid-April before our chameleon carrier detector went off, which means we are getting ahead of the actual risk that brokers are about to take on, that accidents are about to happen. The similar case we just looked at, there were 10 accidents in 10 weeks. Now, if you're not seeing this with cameras on the roads, and I don't blame anyone else, everyone else is saying, hey, they just have one truck, they're clean, no basic access scores, there's no problems. And what Genlogs is actually seeing is that this one truck, one trailer carrier is operating in all of these states. I'm showing a map of the US, and they're basically everywhere. In fact, if you really zoomed in, you'd see these pink dots, which shows where they've been over the last few hours. Those are in a lot of different states. You can't suddenly teleport your truck to a different state.
I thought we had that technology and they were withholding it, but now that we've talked about aliens, they're more readily available. But go on.
Well, it's still in Genlog's skunkworks is to do the teleportation. We'll get there eventually. But when we actually check the tape, so to say, this is verified by video. We saw them operating dozens of trucks, and this is just 16 of them, all different power units under one DOT, when every other platform is basically saying, hey, they're clean, they're good to go, one truck, one trailer, not a problem. We are seeing these risk scores in advance. And I just want to jump ahead to say what's really cool is that Genlogs is now doing something unique here. We are looking at, this is an actual freight brokerage's stable of carriers. For those listening, it's a lot of like dots everywhere on the screen. But what we're breaking this down along the x-axis is that you have the FMCSA ISS score. This is what the government is basically saying, what is the risk of this carrier? And then you have the Genlogs review score, which is looking at those hidden risk elements, chameleon carriers, hours of service violations, all of these little other violations that we continue to look at and add that we can see, even if the inspection record doesn't find it. And we can basically break down a freight broker's carriers into 4 quadrants. On the upper right is the carriers you just don't want to touch. because not only does the government agree that they're a pretty unsafe carrier, but Genlogs is looking at them and saying, yeah, we see some pretty unsafe behavior on the roads through our cameras as well. But then you have these two yellow quadrants in the upper left hand, lower right hand that are where we might be at disagreement with the FMCSA on that. Then we might say, hey, you're saying that they're rather low or rather high, I guess, ISS score. We are just not seeing certain signals in the data that actually show that they are a true risk in that way. For instance, Covenant might fall in that category where, yes, the actual letter of the law would push them into a higher ISS category. And yet Genlogs is saying, on the whole, they do pretty well out there on the roads. Whereas there are others that you would want to worry about. And then finally, that lower left hand is where you have both low ISS scores, low review scores. And that's really the sweet spot. And the beauty is because Genlog sees all 353,000 carriers on the roads, we can find you as many carriers that fit into that category as you can really handle.
Interesting.
Yeah. And we could break that down to say, when it all is said is done, these are you have low risk on these carriers, and we can document it as such. The Genlogs review score is going to be explainable. It's going to say why we rank them low or high or medium. But the important part is we can really give some good documentation to our customers as to why they continue to use these carriers, even if the basic or ISS scores might have been a little bit different. And I think we all need to keep in mind, this is constantly changing. You're going to have all of these scores moving around on any given day. Some carriers are getting safer, unsafer, and vice versa. And we're going to be on top of it. And we're going to make sure that we're catching it all and making sure that our customers stay on the right side of history.
This is interesting. Now, we have so many comments, and usually I just ignore them. And for the ones who are watching, thank you for commenting, and I will continue to ignore you. But what I would say is we are entering this new uncharted territory, and that is we are really going to be scrutinizing what brokers are doing and how they've been doing it. When you have a process that's written down and you deviate from the process, it's kind of like you don't have a process. And as brokers are navigating this new potential liability, and I want to be very clear, it's a potential liability. We do not know what every individual state will say is a reasonable vetting process. The one thing that I would emphasize to everyone who's listening and watching is that if you have a process now, and it's the same process you had before Montgomery, you probably need to talk to two people. I'm going to say three people. One is your adjuster or your insurance company. Ask them what's happening. You should probably talk to outside counsel. What's the state of the industry now? And if that lawyer doesn't know, you maybe want to find someone different. And then you probably want to talk to people like you, Ryan, who have built out something that is novel. And we, in transportation, we love to think everything is novel, but not much is novel. Like, we've been doing this for a minute. But you've built this set of tools to collect information, which you can then, benchmark against your existing tools. And if we're trying to figure out what is a reasonable process, and there's tools that provide more insights than the tools you currently have, kind of feels like you might be a little bit unreasonable. So as we kind of get ready to wrap this up, I think it's important. Oh, there's people asking for the YouTube channel. Yeah, I'll answer your comments. Ryan will answer your comments later. We're not going to answer your comments right now. But again, I appreciate them. Again, I will ignore them. We're in this really interesting moment, Ryan. And I want to kind of ask you, where do you see this going? What are you building next? If you can share any insights as to what we think we're going to see in the weeks and months to come.
Yeah, and I just want to double tap that. A lot of that early discussion was a little bit to show how difficult this is. Like, Genlogs is not going to give you the answer on a silver platter. And if any other platform is claiming that they do, then run for the hills. But what we are going to be able to do is provide a rubric or a toolkit that allows you to say, hey, we did go to the new standard of care. Genlogs is allowing us to not only use what a carrier self-reports, what the ELDs say, what the actual FMCSA sees in inspections, but also what does this nationwide network of cameras kind of unveil? That's what we want to be able to do. Now, I'll tell you where we're going next week is if you looked at Justice Kavanaugh's comments, and in fact, let me go ahead and just share one more time for those so we can actually walk through it.
As you pull it up, let me just be very clear. For John, yes. Okay, fine, John. Fine. You can have your comment on the screen. John Quintera, big fan of you and I think Freight Fraud Task Force might be it. But anyway, a lot of people talk about how great Ronnie is too. But John, you're a good dude. I'm sorry for ignoring so many of your comments. All right, I bring this up. Here we go. Boom.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of say, these are like, when I look at the Supreme Court's decision, there were 4 quotes that really stood out to me, but I'm going to double tap on the last 2. I'm going to read them out loud. This is that brokers just have to hire carriers that actually have a reasonable policy. That was Justice Kavanaugh's words. And then he also says, the broker is not going to have a problem if it's asking the hard questions of the carrier. And this is really where I think a lot of brokerages miss the point. They will use FMCSA data. They will use third-party platform data. They will use a lot of other data, but what they won't do is ask the hard questions of the carriers.
Just to build that, Ryan, a lot of people don't even want to speak to the carrier. Like that's like the hard question is like asking any question. In my day, I'm an old man, I'm 41. You would call people physically and say, I need references. Tell me 2 people I can call that work with you that I can talk. Again, like that's probably not the way it works anymore, but it's interesting.
Yeah, fully agree. And this is where GenLogs is going to help do that. We're developing the hard questionnaire, so to say. Justice Kavanaugh said, ask the hard questions. We have a hard questionnaire that any freight brokerage can have their carriers go through that will actually answer those hard questions and at least get it documented that they were asked the hard questions and that the answers were found to be reasonable and ordinary care standards of safety. And so next week, we'll be rolling this out to our customers in beta and then expanding behind. Soon, we're going to allow any carrier to go through it, and they're going to be able to say, look, I'm safe, and let me walk you through how I'm safe and explain it, show you the policies, share that, make sure that I'm raising my hand to say, I want the reasonable and ordinary care standard to be like that badge emblazoned on my profile. That's a initial standard. And then from that point on, GenLogs basically says, are you following what you said? Are you practicing what you preach? And then we're looking at on the roads. When you put those 2 together, the carrier said they had these policies in place. They were asked the hard questions. And then GenLogs verified that they seem to be following that. That will provide a very strong shield for brokers as they unfortunately might be pulled into the courtroom in the future.
Well, that's a great note. We'll be following the progress of the new deployments. Obviously, we're a big fan of you and your team. Thank you for joining us. Where can people find more about GenLogs and, of course, Ryan Joyce?
Sure. Well, you can find us on our website, genlogs.io, GenLogs.io. We're also on X at GenLogs and on LinkedIn. And then myself, you can find me on X at Ryan Joyce Voice.
I will link those because
even though I don't have a great one today, that's the name, Ryan Joyce Voice. Thanks for linking it, Matt, and thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. All right, well, you got to go. I got to say goodbye to the raving fans that have joined us because you have done something remarkable. This is an interesting moment. I think the tailwinds for what you have built are phenomenal, and I appreciate you making time to join us, even though you're a little under the weather, my friend.
You got it. Always happy to join.
All right, everybody. That is the show. Let me get the outro. Tristan Nolan, Werner Enterprises, he made this wonderful soundtrack. Look, the reality is this case has long tales behind it. We don't know yet. Many people say it's the end of the world. Other people say it's nothing at all. Let me be clear. The Supreme Court does not take cases that don't matter. That's not what they do. They take cases that have huge implications, but oftentimes you don't know what those implications are. So often in transportation, we ask the question, what is an unsafe motor carrier. And oftentimes you don't know the answer until after the accident. But if there is information, if there is data, if there is platforms and tools that can help you with your discernment, and discernment is incredibly important in this day and age, GenLogs is that tool. They've been a proud sponsor, and I'm lucky, fortunate, blessed to have them as part of our collection of awesome things behind me. Of course, we have our friends at DAT. Dial a Truck. It's 1978. 1978. They have been helping people move freight across this great nation of ours, and great it most certainly is. I hope to see you next time. We'll have more great content coming to you. And if you want that slide deck, send Ryan a message on X or LinkedIn. Say, Ryan, I want those slides. I have to take them to the senior leadership team and scream at them why we have to do something different. Because here's the reality. Maybe you can take a couple $1 million verdicts against you, maybe, but only a handful of companies can take the gut punch that is a thermonuclear $100 million verdict. And maybe you have the insurance, but maybe you just need to have a really good set of tools in your toolbox. We will see you next time on the Armchair Attorney podcast, beloved by many people as we talk about the great technologies and the great people who help move America. I will see you again next time. Yeah, that sounds like a good outro, right? Yeah, it seems like that. We'll answer your comments later. We'll do that later.